So we're still here pretty much on our journey through the digestive tract. Chyme has left the stomach, entered the duodenum, and we have talked about the liver and the production of bile. Next, we're going to talk about the pancreas and the pancreatic secretions, and then put it all together and talk about how the bile and the pancreatic secretions end up in the duodenum at the same time as the chyme. And that is going to be one of the essay questions for the exam. So next up, pancreas. First up, a little bit of review from chapter 17. Hopefully you remember the pancreas produces insulin and glucagon. The cell population within the pancreas that produces these hormones are called the islets. So these light-colored cells here and here are islets. And then on this kind of grainy-looking slide, there's some islet cells here, and maybe there, and a little bit there. So just remember the islets produce the insulin and glucagon. And then the rest of the pancreas, I should go back, right? All of these other cells here, right? If it's purple and it's not an islet, it's an acinar cell, or the acini. These have an exocrine function, which means they secrete things into a duct. What they secrete is enzymes along with pancreatic juice. And it's not important that you know the distinction, but it's nice to know that you have these duct cells that produce a watery mucus or juice, and then the actual acinar cells which produce a more concentrated enzymatic solution that mixes with the juice. And that's why they say here pancreatic juice is a watery alkaline solution with the enzymes in it. Most of the water comes from the duct cells, and then the enzymes come from the acinar cells. So you want to know these enzymes here, amylase, lipase, and nuclease are secreted, and those, as this says right here, are secreted in active form. So they exist in the pancreas in the same form that they exist when they get secreted into the pancreatic juice. The proteases, on the other hand, like the pepsinogen that we saw in the stomach, are secreted in an inactive form. This is so that they don't digest each other while they're in the pancreas, because they are proteins whose job it is to disassemble other proteins. So if all of these enzymes here were active in the pancreas, they would just start digesting each other. So what you need to know is the pancreas produces trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen, and procarboxypeptidase. You will never have to write any of those, but you need to know that they're all inactive enzymes, or what are called proenzymes. And then embedded within the cell membrane of the epithelial cells in the brush border is another enzyme called enteropeptidase. Enteropeptidase is responsible for activating these enzymes, and then when they're active, they're called trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase. So you need to know that these are inactive proenzymes that get converted to these active enzymes by enteropeptidase, which resides full-time in the small intestine. So what we're going to talk about next is what happens when the chyme ends up in the duodenum, and how do you coordinate the release of bile, the production of bile, along with the release of pancreatic juice. Before we get there, we have to talk about what happens before chyme enters the bile. So this is about the same time as the cephalic phase of gastric secretions is taking place. So you're looking at food, you're thinking about food, your brain knows you're going to eat, it starts preparing your digestive tract. And what it does is it stimulates your gallbladder to release a little bit of bile into the duodenum. Some of that bile actually gets reabsorbed by the bloodstream, and that's what they're supposed to show you here. And we're going to see later in a couple of slides, by the time this bile makes it back to the liver by circulating through the bloodstream, this is about when chyme is showing up in the small intestine. So this little bile that gets secreted before you even eat is going to play a role when we get to what happens when you're trying to digest your meal. And this part we don't care about. I just deleted that. So, right, we're talking about when chyme hits the duodenum, we're going to need some pancreatic juice with those enzymes in it, and we're going to need bile from the gallbladder, and then start ramping up bile production in the liver to replace what the gallbladder has just squeezed into the duodenum. So it is a 6-step essay question. It will be 6 points on the exam, and it starts before you eat with the vagus nerve stimulating the secretion of bile, which is not shown on this figure. They don't show bile anywhere, which is unfortunate. So then what is shown is chyme entering the duodenum. The presence of chyme in the duodenum causes the release of 2 hormones, CCK, cholecystokinin, and gastrin. Or secretin, excuse me. I wonder why I couldn't find gastrin on there. CCK and secretin get released. You will not have to spell cholecystokinin. This is one of the exceptions I make. So these 2 hormones are going to enter the bloodstream. When they both get to the pancreas, they cause the release of pancreatic juice and pancreatic enzymes. You don't have to know which one causes the secretion of which. You just need to know that 2 hormones hit the pancreas because you need enzyme-rich juice and bicarbonate-rich juice. So then the CCK and secretin make it back to the liver and the gallbladder, along with the bile salts that were secreted all the way back here in step number 1. So the bile salts are going to hit the liver. Whoops, this is not bile salts. Bile salts hit the liver and cause the liver to start producing more bile. And then cholecystokinin hits the gallbladder and causes a contraction in the gallbladder to squirt a relatively, well, not large amount, but a good squirt of bile into the small intestine. So the liver just makes this sort of dilute bile drip by drip, which gets stored and concentrated in the gallbladder so that you can squirt a good bit in every time you eat. So that is the 6 steps that regulate bile production and pancreatic secretions when food enters the duodenum. So now the small intestine is filled with everything it needs. It's got all of the enzymes and the right juices, and food is going to continue traveling through those 10 or 12 feet of small intestine, and along the way all of your macronutrients are going to be broken down into small molecules that your body can absorb. Water is going to follow along, and then you are going to get to the end of the small intestine, which is the ileocecal valve, and that ileocecal valve or sphincter is going to relax and admit the food into the large intestine. And for us, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. All we care about, well, not all we care about, I should say, the major function of the large intestine for us is just to propel feces towards the anus. There is, as you can see here, a small amount of vitamin and water absorption that takes place in the large intestine, but the overwhelming majority of water and nutrient absorption that takes place in your body takes place in the small intestine. One of the important processes that takes place in your large intestine, or one of the important things about your large intestine, is all of this bacteria that resides in it. So that is called your bacterial flora. It is mostly a lot of E. coli or fecal coliforms. And we're just sort of beginning to understand everything that it does for your body and how it affects your health, and just many different aspects of homeostasis. But we're just going to know that there's a lot of bacteria in your large intestine, and they are important to the proper functioning of your body. This just lists some of the smaller, better known things that they do, like trying to digest to a certain extent more complex carbohydrates or fibers. That causes the production of gases. This is where flatulence comes from. And then some B-complex vitamins along with vitamin K get synthesized by the bacteria in your gut. That then brings us to the end of your digestive tract, and you will deposit your feces, hopefully, into a toilet. Sorry, that was kind of crude. But that's the end of your digestive tract there. We are going to go over these last few slides in lecture because they are important. What's the word I'm looking for? Important essay questions. But when you look over all of this stuff on your own, what you want to be able to do for each macronutrient is track it as it goes through the digestive system and say what happens to it in the mouth, what happens to it in the stomach. So any mechanical digestion or any enzymatic digestion, then what happens to it in the small intestine, and then where do the nutrients end up? And the answer to that question is always either going to be blood or lymph. And you're going to see that all of your micronutrients, with the exception of your dietary fats, end up in the bloodstream, and your dietary fats end up in the lymph. So that's this one. We'll go over all this stuff in lecture, so don't worry that there's stuff that we haven't talked about yet.